Many Jews who reached the Swiss border were sent back to face certain death in the camps. And many Jews who were stopped at the border committed suicide rather than be sent back. Hitler needed Switzerland to take his gold and launder it into hard currency, with which he could buy the weapons to continue to prosecute the war. Many of these armaments were manufactured in Swiss factories, so the Swiss raked in even more money in a second level of transaction, that is, by selling vast amounts of ammunition and other vital war material to Germany. Because of Switzerland's supposed neutrality, its arms factories could not be bombed by the Allies, even though their weapons were destined for Hitler's war against them. While British and American bombers successfully dented the industrial capacity of the Third Reich, in Switzerland, the unmolested factories continued to churn out weapons.
There's a document which we've read, which I find curious, sent by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of State in 1940, I believe it was 43, in the spring of 43. And it said that our bombing of Germany was rather ineffective because the Swiss kept shipping in the stuff to replace it.
To exacerbate the situation, the Swiss Air Force actually shot down Allied bombers that strayed into its airspace. It remains one of the most glaring acts of hypocrisy of the whole war. But even worse, recent evidence confirms that Switzerland allowed German trains carrying enslaved laborers to pass through its neutral territory. A Swiss railwayman, Otto Frey, remembers being ordered to keep this fact a secret.
Ab und zu hat man das etwa Hilferuf gehört, aber das ist also minim gesehen. Die sind natürlich auch vom Ausgangsbahnhof Gasso sind die vorgemeldet worden und man hat dann die mit einer gewissen Sorgfalt müssen behandeln, dass sie schlankenweg wieder zu der Schweiz ausgekommen sind.
Even trains destined for the death camps made their way through Swiss stations. There's evidence that in late 1943 in Zurich, a train carrying Italian Jews was halted. One woman remembers a chilling night when she was asked to take soup to the station.
There was a Red Cross official, a lady, who told us the trains would come in at night, that we were supposed to bring flashlights, that we would be in teams of 4. Very slowly, these cars came and stopped, and a man came out from our station, and one of the recollections I had is, although it was very dark, when this car opened, the man or the face who peeked out was very white. It was very tense. And I also remember I thought, what would happen if all of a sudden all these people pushed this man aside and came tumbling out of the car? And I was worried. In a way, I wished they would be free, but in a way, I didn't want them to come out. We knew that they were going to Germany. We knew they were Jews. We knew about the concentration camps.
Switzerland was clearly not innocent, and certainly complicit in some of the most heinous crimes of the Nazi regime. But even as the war turned against Hitler, the Swiss continued to prosper. As German armies retreated, many Nazis, fearing Allied retribution, deposited their ill-gotten gains into Swiss banks. In a nightmare development, this wealth was earmarked to create one of Nazism's most perverse schemes, the infrastructure of the Fourth Reich. By the autumn of 1943, Hitler's dream of a Nazi empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals began to evaporate. The army had got bogged down in the mud and ice of Russia. Thousands of casualties were strewn across the landscape, from Stalingrad to Kursk. Senior Nazi bureaucrats realized their illicit wealth was no longer safe in the Third Reich. The steady flow of looted gold into secret bank accounts in Switzerland grew into a flood. Stolen art treasures were auctioned in Swiss art galleries, and the proceeds used to prepare escape routes for senior Nazis to evade the encroaching Allied forces. But in 1944, British and American intelligence agents became aware of these transactions. They responded by initiating Operation Safe Haven. Its mission was to locate, track and retrieve Nazi assets that were being moved into neutral countries. The revelations from their covert investigation were appalling. Under cover of Swiss secrecy laws, the Nazis appeared to have shipped over $6 billion in assets to Switzerland between 1938 and 1945. In today's values, that represents at least $60 billion. A lot of this money was to be used to help high-ranking Nazis escape from Allied justice. An American intelligence report identified a massive sum held by Hitler's foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop. The senior Nazi politician used the German embassy in Geneva to launder a fortune in gold to banks in Lugano and Lucerne, a fortune that remained in secret accounts long after the war was over. Ribbentrop may also have helped transfer funds for German industrialists who were planning to rebuild their business empires after the war was over. But the deceit did Ribbentrop no good. He was tried at Nuremberg in 1945 and found guilty of war crimes. 11 months later, he was hanged. In Holland, another escape fund belonging to German industrialists was located by American intelligence agents. But buried within the safe haven files is an even more disturbing revelation. Evidence that some German industrialists were preparing to resurrect a new Reich after the war. They worked with a group of top SS officers. Using neutral countries, they planned to accumulate wealth and missile technology that could be channeled to Nazis working underground in post-war Germany. The plan was never implemented, but neither has the money ever been recovered. Yet another safe haven document contains the names, addresses and telephone numbers of over 30 Swiss lawyers who, the agents believed, were hiding German assets, including gold and looted art treasures. In the final year of the war, Allied bombing pounded the heart of Berlin into rubble. The Reichsbank and its branches suffered severe damage, and the Nazis decided to disperse their holdings to hiding places scattered around the country. The wealth was sent south by truck and train to Bavaria. There it was hidden in deep caves in the Alps. Most of it was recovered by the Allies at the end of the war, but $20 million worth of it has never been found. In 1984, Ian Sayer, author of Nazi Gold, went on a search for the missing treasure. He describes what happened next at the lakeside village of Einsiedel.
One dark, very dark evening, German soldiers dressed as German officers took it up, led mules all the way along that mountainside there, right up to the top. And when they got to the top, they buried this gold and the currency into a number of different holes right at the top of the mountain there. And there it stayed until the Americans occupied the area.
When the Americans arrived in Einsiedel in 1945, they heard rumors about this missing treasure. One of the Germans who had buried the gold, Colonel Friedrich Rauch, decided to rebury it in the village of Garmisch.
They buried the currency in that garden of that house just over there. It stayed there for some weeks, and then Colonel Rauch came back again with an American and quite a few troops. And he demanded of the people that were in the house, that they should hand over the currency, and he specified a particular sum. He gave them 3 weeks to dig all the money out of the garden, and then 3 weeks later he came back, collected it all up and put it in his jeep and headed off down the hill. The last time it was ever seen was in US military custody, and nobody has ever seen it since.
Joseph Pinzel was one of the Germans involved in hiding this gold and remembers revealing part of the hoard to the Americans.
I'd been gossiping to my friends in the guest house that I knew where the gold was hidden. As a result, 2 Americans, probably from their intelligence agency, came to me, and I took them to a place called the Cow Hole up in Einsiedel. A German officer joined us, and we went up the mountain. They took a metal detector. The needle started to move at a place covered by logs. It was a very big hole. One of the Americans went off straight away and came back with 2 lorries which they loaded. It looked like square bricks, like something heavy. Yes, gold. They loaded it onto the lorry, a huge amount.
But when American officials made an inventory of the money, they were disconcerted to find that some $20 million worth of it in gold had disappeared. American and German soldiers may be the culprits. The money has never been recovered. Jewish survivors of the Holocaust are now trying to rebuild their lives and recover the life savings of their dead relatives. What they have found is denial and obstruction. Swiss banks have been involved in one of the most disturbing stories of the aftermath of war. (1945) marked the end of the war in Europe. American soldiers had uncovered some of the stolen treasure in the mountains of southern Germany. In the Kaiserode salt mine, they found gold and cash from the Reichsbank. Wealth stolen by the SS, precious stones, share certificates, and gold teeth from concentration camp victims. They also discovered many stolen cultural treasures, including paintings and sculpture, some of the finest works of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. The amount of recovered gold rose steadily, but it was still just the tip of the iceberg. The reserves of entire countries were still hidden in some Swiss bank accounts. While high-ranking Nazis were still being tried at Nuremberg, the Allies embarked on an investigation into the dealings of Switzerland and its bankers. Assets in both America and Britain were frozen as Swiss banks were searched for forgotten German accounts. Many senior Nazis were sentenced to death at Nuremberg, but no such penalties could be served on the Swiss bank managers who stored their money. Switzerland was, for many years after 1945, a continuing haven of neutrality on the frontier of the Cold War between the capitalist West and the communist East. While Operation Safe Haven, the investigation into the Nazi trafficking of gold, remained in place, the Allies decided to settle with Swiss bank officials. Britain was more keen than America to reach a quick agreement. The country was desperate to raise Swiss bank loans in order to rebuild the many cities